Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Brattleboro Literary Festival cocktail hour, and I'm Jenny Altschuler, a member of the author committee of the Brattleboro Literary Festival, and it's finally time for summer reading. We have a summer read here that promises to keep you cool. Sarah Manguso is in conversation with Vermont author Makenna Goodman about Sarah's new novel, Very Cold People, which takes place in the frozen, snowy town of Waitsfield, Mass, and has received so many amazing reviews in major media. Sarah is a fiction writer, essayist, and poet, and author, most recently of the novel Very Cold People, which was published in February 2022. Her other work includes the nonfiction books 300 Arguments, Ongoingness, The Guardians, and The Two Kinds of Decay. Her work has been recognized by a Guggenheim Fellowship and the Rome Prize. She grew up in Massachusetts and now lives in Los Angeles, where she currently teaches creative writing at Antioch University. Makenna Goodman is the author of The Shame, a novel which came out in 2020, and she is based in Vermont. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the hour, so please ask your questions in the Q&A that's at the bottom of your screen, and there's a chat you can use for other things, and other information will be posted in the chat, links to their websites and that sort of thing, and the festival. So I would like to now welcome Sarah and Makenna.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Hi, Makenna.
Hi, Sarah. It is such an honor to be in conversation with you, Sarah. I am a huge admirer of your work, so I'm just nervous and excited.
Oh, I'm happy to talk with you. I mean, you know that I'm a huge fan of your novel, The Shame, and I owe our mutual friend Sheila Hetty, a great Canadian writer, you know, my knowledge of you and your work. So yeah, this is the first time we've met face to face.
I know, it's really exciting. I'm sorry that my neighbor's dog is barking out the window, but such is Zoom life. So we were talking a little bit before this, everybody, about how oftentimes these conversations begin with a reading from the author. And we decided that we're not going to do that. Sarah's not going to do that, that we're going to just launch right into conversation. But I do want to know right away, I just want to talk about form, and in particular, the way that you implement concision. You're known for your formal originality, and you know, you've been praised, and words like, I mean, I don't even know, but just praised for your formal ingenuity. And I'm just curious about how you have a background as a poet, and you've worked across all genre, but I'm just curious how that kind of formal process plays out in your work. Like, do you begin with this kind of gem of a sentence that's just perfect, in my opinion, mostly all the time, if perfect exists,
you know,
or is it a honing sculptural process? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I'm really interested in this question. We should share that Makenna was kind enough to kind of give me a warning shot of some of the things that we were going to aim to talk about today. And so that's one of them. And I've been asked this question in different forms before. And a writer who gets asked the same or a very similar question frequently is Joyce Carol Oates, which is a writer who, I mean, I've met her. I was at Princeton for a couple of years while she was there, but we have absolutely nothing in common other than being asked this question all the time. And for some of those some of you in the audience will know that she's known for being just prodigiously, you know, she puts out a book every 8 months or so and has been for decades. I don't do that, but you know what seems an unusual quirk of my work is that my books are very short. My what I would call the compositional units of my books are very short. I hesitate to use the word chapter. I don't think I've ever really written anything as long as a proper chapter. And so, yeah, it's, you know, occasionally I'm asked, like, does it just come out that way, or does it come out normal and then you make it that way? And, you know, I have to say that the way that I, the decisions that I make about form are all in support of the same idea, which is that I want the writing to sound and mean exactly what it needs to mean, and you know, the way that it needs to sound. And I think, you know, it's it always seems a little bogus when I try to explain my sensibility or base it upon some some concrete event, or it's like, well, I did used to be a newspaper copy editor, and my work was to take, I mean, this is back in the days before the internet, so I would get like 20 column inches, make it 7, write 2 photo captions and a title that can fit on 2 lines. But even before that, in college, I was really interested in Latin, which I didn't have a particularly great secondary school education, but I sang in the church choir at college, and I was really interested in how just concise Latin is as a language. And, I had like ecclesiastical Latin, which had nothing to do with classical Latin, which I then had to start learning as a junior in college. And I mean, and so, yeah, I mean, I had like a few years of that. And I guess before that, I was interested in the way that short texts and small art could mean big things. And so I guess in some way it's just sort of like an aesthetic. It's just my taste. But there's also an element of play too that I think comes into it, which has to do with the idea of like solving a puzzle, like making it as small as possible. I find that very pleasurable. I like throwing things away. I don't have a lot of things in my house. There's nothing behind me on the wall. So I think, it's this taste or this sensibility is expressed in various parts of my life. And I think it's been informed by various experiences of my life. And I can't really trace it to one thing, but, to answer your question more like literally, I sound like this. This is just how I sound. And, of course I revise, everybody revises. Joyce Carol Oates revises. But I don't think that's really the question that you're asking. Like are we sort of talking about like, is it easy for me to write this way? And I would say, yeah, like this is just how I write. I don't sound like, now I'm trying to think of an example. No, I don't want to use anybody's name as an example. That's not nice. But, I really admire, and I've said this a lot, I really admire people who can kind of publish an 800-page novel every 10 years. I think that's great. There's like, I feel bad and almost wasteful that I have all of these short books, but you can't choose. You can't like decide to have a sensibility that you just don't have.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I guess my question was really what are the mechanics of how a book comes into being for you? So hearing about your relationship to objects and the things in your life and how that kind of mirrors an aesthetic or a style is really interesting. Like how are what we do, what we have, what we eat, what we see, what we experience affects our work. And that it's not something that one could necessarily emulate as if it were a style that could be taught in a craft class. And I think that, like obviously you are a writer of great renown. And so often when you see book deals being announced, it's like, in the vein of so-and-so and Sarah Manguso. And I feel like there's this desire, not a desire of the status quo to claim this kind of avant-garde way that you approach your work, but I do feel like there's this viscerality to your work that is so hard to recreate, despite the fact that it is quote unquote small, which I see as a unbelievable bigness, because it's incredibly hard to distill thought to such a degree. But yeah, just like how do you know you're working on something new? Or let's talk about very cool people, but how did you know that this book was happening and that you were working on a novel and that it was manifesting?
It was a very long process toward finishing this book. I always knew that I wanted to write about Massachusetts. I lived there for the first 23 years of my life. I've never lived anywhere close to that duration. It made me in the way that the locus of a childhood makes a person. And in fact, the first long prose book that I published, The Two Kinds of Decay, is putatively about a period of ill health in my 20s. It's about autoimmune disease. It's about college. But it really is, it's an illness memoir. But it didn't start out that way. It started out as the kind of book that I thought I needed to write about Massachusetts, which was nonfiction and heavily interested in social class and money and the particular kinds of poverty that exist in white Massachusetts that I think they're quirky. It's not like being poor in Ohio. And I was writing the book in these compositional units that were between like 1 and 5 pages long. And after the first one that I wrote, which was about the experience of being in a Tony social club at Harvard, having grown up Tony and Townie, just outside campus. I was writing about that sort of that double life. And in writing this scene, I included the fact that I was wearing a catheter in my heart in this particular scene where I'm serving soup to fancy people, as one of the fancy people myself, or pretending to be one. And then I thought, well, okay, so the next unit I'm going to write about this in this Massachusetts book about social class, I'm just going to have to explain where the catheter in my heart came from. And then it became a book about illness. But I was not going to, I knew that I had to eliminate. For me, writing is a kind of, I guess it's akin to therapeutic processing, but all I know for sure is that after I finish the work, I no longer have to think about material anymore. And this Massachusetts material was deep and heavy and broad. And I knew I had to give it another try. So I still had this idea, I was a nonfiction writer. I published 4 books of nonfiction, all autobiographical, all sort of differently shaped, all of them sort of, tangentially involved Massachusetts, but I really wasn't getting the bulk of this material out of me. And it was in about 2015 or 2016 that I wrote a note to my agent, and the whole thing, it was just an email that said, I might be working on a novel. And I sent it to kind of like feel how it would feel to be a person who could say that. And he, characteristically, he wrote back enthusiastically, but without putting any pressure on me at all, knowing that I would figure it out. And it took me 7 more years to figure it out. But during those years, oh God, I don't know at which point I realized that this Boston book or this Massachusetts book was the novel. But that too was this long process. I mean, I still really did think of the book about social class. I thought there was no way it could be anything but like a properly researched, heavily footnoted academic sort of work, even though I had no interest in writing such a book. And yet I read all of the sociological books about the different waves of white or provisionally white immigrants to New England, and I took all the notes, I did all the stuff, and I think after I finished all of the books that I had bought to support that part of the project, I realized, oh yeah, I'm just going to do what I usually do, which is write. I'm a bottom-up thinker. That was maybe the problem, because I was conceiving of this from the top down as like, this is going to explain Massachusetts. Whereas every single one of my books has begun with, the memory of a sense, the memory of an idea, the memory of an event. And I'm very close to the ground in the beginning, and I'm sort of, I'm sweeping up these tiny particles, and then I see patterns, and then I organize them according to pattern. But there's like I don't start out with this like grand central coherence that, if that comes to exist, it's at the very end. And sometimes, my work doesn't have a strong central coherence, which is, my books have definitely been, I've gotten some really intelligent and reviews, critical work full of praise, but I've also gotten plenty of reviews that just sort of say like, well, it's just like a bunch of like tiny things. Like it's just a sentence, especially my book, 300 Arguments. It's like, it's just 300 tiny things. Like what, like listen to this one. It doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I don't particularly disagree that that there are individual bits of my books that don't really seem to carry any weight, but what I like to do, and what satisfies me, is to get to some point at the end at which like I see the coherence, I see the breadth, I see the weight of it, and not everybody will, but that's always the case.
It's funny, I was rereading The Two Kinds of Decay last night, actually, because I've been having these chronic migraines, and I was like, I need to go back to that book and just like locate something here. And I was struck by how it's about illness, but it's about also, I'm reading it about the body, just about the mechanisms of the body and how it functions and how it spurts and how it fails us and how it imprisons us. And thinking about how you, with the small pieces of things that you're collecting, and about how these small so-called smallnesses are not as important as these grand ideas or the grand novel or this great philosophy. And I'm curious about how you kind of see if there's a politics to your work. You're obviously writing about whiteness and very cold people and about class and about positionality, but like, what is, if one can kind of agree that every work of art, and maybe one can't, but has some kind of political thread or political project, what do you feel yours is? And I guess, and I don't mean to put you on the spot in terms of like, what are your politics, but
I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm curious, because I think you have a very sort of strategic philosophy that is woven throughout all of your work that I find that captivates me, and I think captivates a lot of people, that feels like a truth, a great truth that you're articulating in this way, instead of saying like, looking down at a row of ants on the sidewalk and saying, well, ants, are X, Y, or Z. You're like the child who's just watching them along and seeing their truth in that way. So I'm just curious about that.
Well, I definitely agree with the suggestion you've just made, that every piece of art has a politics as well as a poetics, aesthetics. And what always seems to be the absence of politics simply means it's compliant with the greater, white patriarchal culture. I am interested, I find, in any work that centralizes women's experience of their own lives, or really any perspective that's just not compliant with the greater, the surrounding white patriarchal culture. Like, I never need to read a book by a CEO of a blue chip company. Like, I just don't care. And I think this has something to do with the way that I process the world. I was talking about the bottom up thinking, like I really do start with something small that's nagging at me. Just, it might make more sense. So as I age, and as more information about neurotypical processing becomes available to the greater public, more and more, I think I'm like much more solidly on the spectrum than I used to think. I have been reading about, Temple Grandin has had, who is for those who don't know, she's an autistic philosopher and engineer who invented this contraption to humanely slaughter cattle that involves squeezing them very, very, very tightly, which comforts them in like a deep bodily way. And then once they're calm, they're then murdered. But this is like a great improvement on earlier ideas about how to slaughter cattle. Anyway, so not to get too ahead of myself. But anyway, the way that Temple Grandin has described the way that her neurotypical autistic mind works, just it makes a great deal of sense to me. She's done some interesting writing about bottom-up thinking and synthesizing large amounts of data into small forms. And she too has said, like, it's like a particular, almost like a bodily pleasure to take a lot and then to boil it down to something small. And I too feel that pleasure when I work. I had a very hard time learning to drive. Before this webinar started, I learned that Makenna actually spent the first few years of her life in Los Angeles, where I live now. I moved here when I was 36, and I had a driver's license, but I hadn't really driven before because I'd only ever lived in cities or on public transportation lines as I did in Massachusetts. I had a very hard time learning to drive a car at freeway speeds because I had such a hard time filtering out non-essential information. I had to really train myself to like trust that the cars would behave in this sort of like, this is top-down thinking in a predictable way. But in the beginning, I thought of every car as this like individual potential chaos agent. So I had way too much visual information to process, and I couldn't do it and drive above 30. Like it was just like I had to see everything. So I really had to learn this skill of turning off the bottom-up thinking and start thinking of it as like, the greater experience of driving is that everything, people will behave, the cars will behave according to these sort of agreed upon rules. And that was just a really foreign way of processing the world.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Wow. I do think about traffic a lot, actually, like how obviously there's a lot of traffic accidents, but how are there not more? I mean, like this, and chaos itself is a natural system.
Yeah.
I mean, it is something that exists in, that has a rationality to it. But it's amazing. I'm curious, just like, this is so interesting, this idea of bottom-up thinking, and it, for some reason, it's making me think of the idea of autobiography and beginning with the bottom of life being your own life as a way into or up into other people's lives or human existence, if there is such a generalization. And autobiography itself is a fraught term, because what does it really mean? If you were to have written the nonfiction book about Massachusetts, would it be any more true than the one that you've written? I mean, you would have invariably left out details or focused on, I mean, there's bias inherent in everything. So your work has been called memoir, you've called it autobiography, nonfiction, this is a novel. There is obviously a personal element involved, as there is with everything that one writes. What is the role of autobiography in your work? Or like, what do you really, I'm curious about what you think about the word and the taxonomy, and just like your feeling about, and I guess this kind of goes into genre too, like what are these categories that we can constantly try to wedge things into, and why are they there?
Oh yeah, no, Americans love sorting things into genres. Nothing irritates me more than to be asked to teach or participate in a class that's environmental nonfiction or fragmented nonfiction, as if these things are distinct from each other. I actually got in trouble at not really, but I was mildly censured after teaching a week-long class in an arts organization, and I'll just say it's in Colorado, and because it was supposed to be a class on fragmented nonfiction, but I don't know how to teach fragmented nonfiction. All I know how to do is what, there's no, I guess what I'm saying is that, like, I don't think there's like a particular process or mechanics of writing fragmented nonfiction that is at all different from writing any other kind of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I mean, it sounds like you too have some frustration with the fact that everything has to be like sorted into its little box. I will say, oh God, your question made me think of so many things, and I'm trying to remember all of the ideas that you just unleashed. It is, it is true that this most recent book of mine is a novel. It's my first novel. It's definitely a novel, and one of the things that I can't help thinking about is that there are writers who are hailed as writers of autofiction, which is, of course, distinct from real fiction. And to bring our mutual friend Sheila up again, I was talking with her about this, and about the frustration that, like, autofiction is sort of, depending on the context in which the word is deployed, it seems like an insult or an act of elevating. If Ben Lerner's in the group, it's like, oh, he's a man, so autofiction is good. But then Sheila said something that stays with me and always will, which is, it's all autofiction. Like, you can't not be a self writing. You can't eliminate the self from a single sentence that you write. So, this is a useless, once again, we've come up with another category that's functionally useless in sorting something essential, from, some separately essential.
Or it has a use, and its use is to subcategorize women.
Yes. Yeah, right. I know. Yeah.
So that they are not the norm.
Ghettoize women.
Yeah.
It's interesting though that I've sort of gently posited that this isn't autofiction, and no one said it is. So it was also so shockingly easy, and yet there's been criticism that points out the obvious fact that I'm from Massachusetts, that I grew up during the era that Very Cold People takes place in. And yet it's sort of like the shadow side of the criticism of autobiography, which when you publish it, it's criticized as being just made up. It's a pack of lies.
Right.
So
not true
to have it both ways, right? Exactly. Autobiography is just a pack of lies, and novels are all just true if women are writing them.
Yeah.
Is that just your diary? Like, well, no, but also my diary is good reading. Believe me, I revise it as I go. It's really quite good. So a lot of these things they're meant as insults, and they don't really register that way to me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's more to say about women's writing. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna.
No, you keep going. Keep going. No. I'm taking us down a path that I'm really interested in. I want to make sure you're interested in too. Keep going.
I'm definitely interested. I would just, all I wanted to say was that I'm interested in the way that you process the sort of volumes of criticism of women's books, and whether it seems distinct from a certain other kind of book. I mean, certainly there are more books by non-white men published and reviewed than ever, but it's still, it's not half. It's not, it's not truly representative of, the number of books that are being written or the number of souls that are creating art. but you're probably like what, like 10, 15 years younger than I am.
37.
Okay, sure. 11 years younger.
Uh-huh.
And I'm always curious about how things sort of see, how the wider culture seems, because you probably missed like, the mid 90s when I came of age, and it was like, I mean, I had far fewer role models who looked and acted and thought and came from places that resembled me and mine.
Totally. I mean, I think it took me a really long time to find the literature that really grabbed hold of me and made me feel like I wasn't alone. I mean, and I went to like whatever, a private high school and a, liberal arts college. But I remember I decided not to be an English major, even though I knew deep down I wanted to be a writer, because the class called The Great American Novel was not great at all. It was all basically white men, maybe one woman. I don't know, but it was just like so dry and so kind of curated and prepackaged. It didn't feel like, if great was an all-encompassing, like magnificent idea, it didn't feel magnificent at all. I mean, it brings up the question of like, who are the arbiters of culture, and how does, books don't just magically appear on our desks, right? Like they are sort of filtered through a machine, a cultural machine that's dictated by capitalism and whoever is like the puppet masters of those corporations. And I think, as we've seen in the publishing industry, more and more monopolization and like, probably, I'm assuming, I haven't been in publishing for a while, but what I hear is less and less risk-taking editors who aren't able to like take a chance on something that feels, great and exciting and edge pushing, and they have to, go for what is going to make money. And so, I feel like I don't like a lot of books, honestly. And I find myself steering towards certain publishers who I know either they're nonprofits or whatever, like, or they take risks. They have editors who like have the ability to have the power or whatever, have the publisher's ear. But I do see a trend, and I can't, like, now that I'm about to generalize this, I can't think of anything specific, but I feel like it's very subtle and it's linguistic. It's like at the sentence level, like the words and the definitions that are used to describe male writers who are writing about human existence and being and becoming as a kind of philosophical inquiry into humanity and life and consciousness. And when women do it, it's, as you said, the diary. The second you hear the word mother, the second you hear the word girl or
it's
daughter,
more insidious than that. I think you're absolutely right. And I did this in the mid 90s. I actually went through, I don't know, several months of the New York Times Book Review and collected adjectives. And it was so fucking, excuse me, depressing after those few months. I just couldn't even go on. But yeah, quirky, whip smart, that's a good one. That's never used
in
to
her
describe.
Own right. That's a big one.
No, whip smart really gets me. I guess that it could occasionally be used to describe a book by a gay man, or a non-woman gendered person. But yeah, I mean, I know, to bring up a review that really struck me when it was published and still does. Dwight Garner reviewed my book Ongoingness in the New York Times, in the Daily New York Times, where he's still a critic. And it really seemed bizarrely like outside of the kind of criticism that you're supposed to write when you're writing about a book. And it wasn't until I was in Portland reading from that very book, Ongoingness, which the subtitle is The End of a Diary. It's a book about a diary, my diary. It wasn't until then, after the reading, when a group of women came up and said, hey, we wanted to tell you that we run like a feminist literary group, and we had a whole session devoted to that Dwight Garner review of your book. I thought, okay, like there's something happening in the culture and it's good. Like there's a resistance happening. One of the, it's, it was a negative review, and but that was almost beside the point. There were sentences like, here's one that I'll always remember. Each of Manguso's books squats on a perch between poetry and prose. So, so he would never have used squats on a perch to describe, books by a man who maybe writes poetry and prose. Ben Lerner comes to mind. He would never say that Ben Lerner squats. He stands astride the great genres. So, it may be, I'm in a position of much greater privilege than I was in the 90s when I first started perceiving this, this essential problem. And so, when I see it now, and it is everywhere. And in fact, I did get a text from a writer friend this morning who sent me yet another example of this very problem. When I see it, I just think, oh, well, that man's making a fool of himself, which isn't really true. Like I can see it that way because I'm not as, I can't be hurt as easily. My career cannot be suppressed as easily as it could 20 years ago. It depresses me that it's still as bad as it is, but I assure you it was much worse 20-25 years ago.
I'm sure. And I think people, it's thanks to writers like you who have kind of like paved the way of like just not becoming the kind of woman writer that kind of
it's the
exists in a man's
gatekeepers.
world.
Yeah, women have always been writing interesting work. It's the gatekeepers. It's not me. It's just the few people who were persuaded to actually publish me.
Yeah, I really think about criticism a lot and the media and just how important people who are writing about books are. And it's like honestly, with the advent of Zoom, it's made intimate conversations with writers so much more available to be able to, wherever you are, wherever you're watching it, whether it's live or later, to be able to kind of see inside brilliant minds and not have like the only kind of experience of one's work is either the work itself or the critics who are writing about it. So, I think
I love it too. Yes, that is one bonus to COVID and quarantining.
What are you thinking like about other writers? Some people say, oh, like I don't read when I'm writing.
Oh, I read constantly all the time.
What are your reading habits? Or can you talk about like, what your impulses are, not necessarily who you're reading that excites you, but like if there's, a kind of pattern to your reading?
I think my reading habits have changed, or they're constantly changing, I think, as everyone's are. And probably what is forming or modifying my sensibility is something that I'm not even really conscious of. But I can say that every day and this is a new thing, I spend I have a timer on my browser and I get 15 minutes on Twitter and I just read Moira Donegan, Sarah Kendzior, Leah McKelrath, Lauren Huff, Miriam Gerber-Serrano, and other, mostly women, but not exclusively women, Ellie Mistel, who are, I think, writing about this particular political historical moment with an understanding of its context that is way more nuanced than anything in any newspaper, although Moira does do pieces for the Guardian occasionally, and so do some of the others. But I really feel like having access to these great minds and having access to what they share so frequently, sometimes several times a day on Twitter, is what is this is my political education. So I do that every day. I go through periods of like wanting to read lots of books, one after the other, and then I have different periods where I only want to just read one book of poetry over and over again. I think a lot of writers read the way that I do. I mean, it's definitely like a gluttonous kind of experience, but I also read and reread like little bits of things that I know are just so amazing. It's like a favorite song, so like nobody's ever faulted for listening to a favorite song 200 times, but so why should reading the same 2 pages of Catherine Davis's novel, for example, that's something that I recently read and loved. I just need to read the same 2 pages of it over and over again. Like I don't need to read the whole book. So like, why is that pathological? And listening to your favorite song 200 times isn't. So yeah, lots of repetition. I read really broadly. I've always loved reading like medical literature. And this is probably rooted in the fact that I have had a couple of rare illnesses, and other things that I don't know are maybe characteristic. I don't know. I mean, I try it all. I recently read my first Agatha Christie novel, which I don't know if you've ever read one, but there are some crazy sentences in that woman's work. My God. And I do feel a sort of like a bashful reticence before reading like a great, a so-called great, one of those great books that was probably taught in that great American novel class that you took in college. I don't know. I mean, it makes me self-conscious. Like, of course I would be reading this. It's so embarrassingly obvious. And so there are a lot of great books that I haven't read, but yeah, I don't know. It doesn't cause me any like particular worry, or not enough that I would actually pick up War and Peace and read it. Although I have read Anna Karenina.
Are you drawn to things that inspire you as a writer, where you're like, oh, I got to try that, or like
it
are you drawn to
that
people who write like you, but are you drawn to things that are like?
I'm drawn to things that I think are the best. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, perhaps it might have some qualities that intersect with the qualities of my work formally and in some other way. A really great book that I read recently that's coming out in August, I think, by Anna DeForest is, I'm going to get the title wrong, but it's a book about what it's like to be a poor person in medical school. But it's so much more than that. It's just one of the greatest books about like being in personhood and life and death that I've read in a long time. And characteristically, it's very short. It's, I think, under 200 pages. But it's just one of those short, perfect books that I would love to have written, and that I seem to try to keep writing. So yeah, I read that twice. I'll probably read it again. Yeah, it's like a favorite song,
Yeah. So can you talk about what you're working on next?
Yeah, of course. So I'm working on 2 books right now. One of them is a novel that's quite different from Very Cold People. It is about a marriage, and it's called Liars. I'm sort of like over the hump in working, like I can see the whole shape of it, but it's not quite at the point at which I feel I can like responsibly describe what's in it. But I am going to keep that title, and it is definitely about a marriage.
A great title.
And thanks. And the other book that I'm working on is quite different from anything I've ever done, and it's called Questions Without Answers. And I conceive of it as a kind of work. It's a work of philosophy, but it's like a choral work, many voiced work. And it began when I started collecting the questions that my son asked me when he was very young. so when he was about like ages 3 to 5, he asked me some really amazing, mind-bending, just totally avant-garde, brilliant questions. And I wrote them down. I write everything down. I write all the good stuff that I see and hear and feel, I write down. And I always wanted to do something with them, but I didn't really have enough. Like I had maybe 50 good ones. And then I asked a lot of my writer friends or artist friends, like, how do you think this could be a book? And several of them said, well, it's a little cutesy the way it is, but if you had like 30,000 words of questions, like this could actually be something amazing. And I thought, oh my God, that's the answer. That's it. So I am working with a fantastic research assistant who's a student at WVU, and she's getting course credit for basically using the internet to obtain more questions, which is something I sort of delicately tried to do, but I'm 48 years old. I don't know how to use social media. I've never really done it. And so I'm just like very happily collecting questions for this book. I have no idea when I'll be done, but probably within the next year or two. So yeah, that's something that I'm really enjoying working on. It looks like there are a few questions in the Q&A.
Yes.
So okay.
I just wanted to make sure that we talked about at least the work that you're working on. I'm like to think about you in your, and I guess my last question, and this kind of relates to one of the questions in the chat from Connie. I'm always interested in the writer's process, work habits, self-censorship, revision, if you would comment on those. And I guess I would add to that, do you write by hand? Do you have a journal? Like, what are the mechanics?
Yeah, I don't write by hand. I write wherever, whenever, and as much as possible. I email stuff to myself on my phone in the middle of the night. I type with one finger like an old lady, because that's what I am. When my son is 10 now, but when he was young, my writing habits became even more the way that they always were, which is, haphazardly. When I had a good idea, I would write. If I was at work, if I was doing something else, I would just figure out how to write it down. And so when you're taking care of a small child, like everything for you is done like interstitially. So it's still, even though I know I'm like an established writer with a career, like it still feels like, I'm only writing in like the interstitial moments between, kid, cat, laundry, this, that, and I think that is part of why it still seems like so much fun. It's almost like if somebody gave me like a giant office with like a, I don't know, like a wireless printer and all these little things, and like a tea thing, and it like wouldn't be fun anymore. Like I like the idea that I'm sort of like playing hooky all the time in doing my work,
Healing time,
which isn't really. Yeah, I don't know. There's more to say about like being a woman writer or being a woman artist of any kind, especially if you also have children, and being able to maintain this feeling, whether that's a good thing or not. But that's a question for next time, maybe.
So Catherine who asks, autofiction or any fiction, when it's easy, should we feel that it might not be good? And when it's only tedious, will it turn out to be magnificent?
So I think Catherine's asking about the writing process, maybe like if it was easy to write. Does easy to write mean easy to read, or does it mean carelessly written and hard to read? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think I can answer that in general, but in specifically, I can say that there is an ease of, I don't know, there is a kind of ease, like when you tap into a kind of okay, well, what I guess I'm trying to say is that when I relax my will over a piece of writing, piece of anything creative that I'm making, when I kind of surrender to what the work wants to be, there is an ease that comes into the process. And I think that is how I make better work than when I'm like really like grinding it out, like grinding out my reps in the gym. I don't think it should feel that way. And it seldom does. I mean, I'm too lazy to work like that. I don't want to like, if it feels like work, I'm not enjoying it, and I don't really trust the process as much.
So how do you kind of actualize that surrendered space?
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
is
I
it
only
just
write when I
writing the
want to.
truest thing that comes out? Is it like allowing yourself to be bold in ways you think you're not allowed to, or
No,
is
it's
that
neither.
surrender?
No, it's none of those things. It's just the I only write when I want to write.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's it. I only write what I want when I want. And that, you know, for me is at least over the past couple of years, I've been incredibly prolific. I've gone through some major life changes during and since COVID. And you know, certainly that will you know, I won't be writing as much probably in another couple of years, and that's fine too. But I just always write exactly what and when I want. And that was something I had to learn, of course, after college, which is, you know, a place where you do lots of homework if you want to graduate properly. And unlearning that sort of obligation to be a good student, I think was the main part of being able to be an artist.
What a liberating concept, when I feel like the cliche of a writer, which I also feel like is a very masculine story.
Oh, the
is
masculine,
like,
yeah.
wake up
yeah,
at
oh, yeah.
4,
Yeah.
drink a shot of whiskey with my
Yeah,
coffee,
and just work all day. Yeah.
work all day.
Well, meanwhile, an army of women takes care of everything for you. Yeah.
Right.
I am that army.
Yeah. So another Paul is asking, or Paul, could Sarah expand a bit on your reference to Latin? So just this kind of like the influence of having studied Latin in your childhood.
I didn't actually study it until I was 20.
Oh, okay.
Although that seems like childhood from where I'm standing now, but
I studied Latin in my childhood, so I just completely superimposed myself onto that. Sorry.
Oh, no, not at all. No, I really envy you. I wish I really wish I could have had like a masterpiece theater sort of like boys, you know, public schooling. You know, the Latin was just, I mean, I'm nowhere near proficient a reader, but it was just another means of enjoying that very particular art of concision. You know, that you can translate a 2-word Latin sentence into like 15 English words, and you still wouldn't really quite get it right. And that just, I found that really, really appealing. As somebody who just likes short texts and admires short texts that can get a lot accomplished in fewer syllables. Sounded like that sentence didn't really end, but I assure you it did.
How do you, I mean, this is something that I've only published one book, and I'm writing another, but so I don't have like a long kind of thread of things to reference. But how do you know when a project is done, or, you know, maybe when you sell it, or when you've moved on to the next thing, or like, how do you, I just interviewed the painter and writer Celia Paul, who,
oh, wow.
yeah, I
she's
love
so
her.
interesting. I love her work.
Yeah, I love her work. And she talks about how she basically lives actually similar to you, with very few objects, and
Yep.
Her work kind of predominates her psyche and her consciousness, but she turns her paintings to face the wall when she feels she is either done with them or close to done with them, because if she doesn't, she'll be compelled to constantly be working on it.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious for you, like, what are the limits you set for yourself, or when do you know when something's done?
It's not, it doesn't sound or feel the same each time. And certainly just about all of my books, when I'm reading from them after they're published, I revise what's on the page, because it's, oh, I can't bear to read it as writ, because it could be better. Yeah, I mean, there are things to say, certainly now that I am with a larger commercial press and most of my income is book money, as opposed to teaching or editing money. Yeah, I am thinking about like, well, I have to get paid for this new novel, and that's part of the decision, whereas that's never been part of the decision before. I will say that, you're working on your second book. The second book is in some ways the hardest, because the difference between the first book, which you've been working on all your life, like every thought you've ever had, the difference between that book and the second book is a wider gulf than the difference between any other, like the difference between your second and third, or your third and fourth, I think are going to be less dramatic than between the first and the second. And that's, it's interesting to kind of look back at, even like Virginia Woolf or Zadie Smith, or, I look at my second book and I'm like, I don't know what that was. Like, I really didn't know when it was done. That's the thing about the second book. It's like, well, I guess I just wrote another book, but it doesn't feel anything like the first book. A lot of people's second books are not part of, well, let's just say not part of their major work. Certainly mine wasn't. And yet, you have to get that out in order to write the next book. There's always, Annie Dillard has this wonderful passage about how one ought to use it all, spend it all, use it all up, use it now, don't save it for some future book. Because if you do, then the well dries up. It's this wonderful. I'm sure everybody can find it online. Yeah. But what you asked was when a thing is done, how something is done. And at least with Liars, which I'm working on now, I occasionally think of something that should go into the book, like just something that comes in from something I see outside my window or something I read, and these days I try to find, I try to discern whether that particular thing is already in the book, and 100% of the time it's already in the book in some other form. So that's a good that's a good indicator. But there's also, instinct comes into it too, so which is harder to quantify. So I'm not sure that I can come up with a satisfying answer.
I think that satisfies me. The idea of when you write something and you've written it, repetition is always there, and maybe there's definitely beauty in repetition. It's like the thread that, the stories we continue to tell. But the idea that you've kind of already had that thought and articulated it in that book, that you're redoing it.
Yeah, it's very comforting when that happens, because of course you don't remember everything that you've put into a book by the end of it. It's too long.
I want to thank you both.
Jenny's back.
I'm back. I mean, you're welcome to, if there's more, but I know that we're at the end of the hour, so I just wanted to come back and thank you both. This was a fascinating conversation. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and also to let everyone know that the Brattleboro Literary Festival has more than 82 videos of past events, and this one will be on our YouTube channel also. So if you came in late or you had to leave, well, they wouldn't be here if they had to leave, but if anyone wants to share it with other people or see what else we have, please go to our YouTube channel. Jerry put it in the chat, the link to that. This talk will be available soon. And if you subscribe to that channel, you'll be notified when our new videos, including this one, are available. And I want to just let everyone know that next month, on August 12th at 5 p.m., we will host Colleen Kinder, where she will, when she put out a call for authors to write a letter to a stranger about an unforgettable encounter, she opened the floodgates and received amazing responses. She'll be joined by author Jacqueline Michard and others. And anyone who comes will also be invited to submit their own letter to a stranger. So that should be great on August 12th at 5. And on Friday, September 9th, we're hosting author Maud Newton speaking about her book, Ancestor Trouble, which I just happened to finish a few weeks ago. So those are just two upcoming events. And our festival will actually be in person in October, in the middle of October. So everyone can go to our website, brattleboro.literary.festival.org, to find out more. But I just want to thank you both. It was a really incredible conversation. And I might even listen to it again just to really process everything you said.
Thank
So,
you so much, Jenny. And Makenna, thank you. This was pure pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And everybody go out and read Very Cold People. It's brilliant. As are, if you haven't read Sarah's other works, they're all incredible. Top of my list, truly.
And also Makenna's novel.
Thanks.
and everybody check out the chat, because Jerry did put a lot of information and website, everybody, both authors' websites and all sorts of things. So maybe we'll leave it on for a minute or two just for people to scroll up and down if they haven't had a chance. But I'm just looking at it. But thank you. It was really great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.